Good morning, colleagues, wherever you are in this global world. You are most welcome to our Media League, where we focus on aspects to do with issues that affect us positively and negatively as consumers. So we are once again greatly honored to be with you with the Humanist TV Africa, where our colleagues at Humanist Media Africa give us this opportunity. And we will always be grateful to them for enabling us reach out and also network with you. Once again, Chimera Henry, the team leader at Consumer Center. I'm honored to be with you, and I will also be with my colleague, Bernard Bwambale Carlos, the programs head at the Consent, and also the National Coordinator of Food Safety Coalition. We are always honored to get this opportunity to rub shoulders with you digitally by sharing with you the different aspects where we unpack the different issues that deal with our day-to-day. I would ask my colleague Bernard to say hello to you in just a few seconds. Then I will go back and do the curtain riser of today. As we are in the Food Safety Month, we are honored also to run a series of programs with regards to food safety in our respective countries. Bernard, may you please say hello to our audience.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you for always opening this session. I want to thank the viewers out there for always taking their time to listen to us, but also appreciate the colleagues at the Humanist TV for giving us the opportunity to always share with our people out there a number of aspects that usually are taken for granted and yet they actually exist. So for today's session, it's really going to be informative as usual, trying to look at where most of us are eating from, especially the streets, because most of our colleagues are preparing for us food on the streets. But then we are looking at into the details of, do we have regulations, do we have guidelines that are supposed to be supporting them to actually provide safer food for consumers. So we're going to dive into that subject matter during the course of this 1 hour, trying to look at really the guidelines for street food vending. If you go into the business of street food vending, which guidelines are actually in place to enable you do your work according to the standards. And of course, this is for the whole Africa. So if you look at the body, Codex Alimentarius, the African chapter, they have come up with those guidelines to help people who are starting businesses, food businesses on the streets, to be able to help us really provide safer food for our people. And maybe the other concern would be, why are we bringing this subject at this time? You know that most of us at least will grab something from the street to consume, either bread, chapati, Rolex, or maybe meat or whatever it is on the streets. And of course, we see that there's a lot of economic transformation happening on the streets. People are doing business actually on the street. But we think that you should be able to do this business following the set standards or the guidelines, so that you keep providing safer food for our people. And the second reason we are talking about this issue is that we are coming to the end of the food safety month. You know that on the 7th of every June we commemorate the World Food Safety Day, and so we thought it wise that we also look at the value chain, people who are working on the streets giving us the food, what guidelines exist, so that probably we can learn together that there are actually guidelines or there are standards that are supposed to be guiding them. So it's a balance of who is handling food where and who are those that are always not taken care of. So basically, that is why we are bringing the subject matter, and then I know we shall explore a little bit into the details during the course of the presentations. Thank you, Henry. Sorry for over-introducing.
No. It is so lovely because you bring out the nitty-gritty, and as you have put it, you'll find that in the urban setups and peri-urban setups, the majority of the consumers there are accessing their food either from the informal and formal establishments, and some of it are streets. So, all vended food in general. So that is something very good. Bernard, thank you very much for that curtain riser. And like you have put it very well, that we are in the World Food Safety Month, and as Consent and our partners, Food School, plus the Humanist Media Africa, we are greatly, greatly honored that you are giving us an opportunity not only to speak and reach out to consumers, food businesses and regulators or duty bearers in Uganda, but also in the African continent and the other global world. So, colleagues, welcome to exploring guidelines on street food vending, and we would like to use the case of Uganda. Like Bernard has told you, the guidelines for Africa that came up and were agreed on and came into effect as guidelines for the continent as old as 2000. And I recall that meeting was in Uganda when the Codex Coordinating Committee for Africa sat in Uganda in 2000, and they have been revised and simplified. So today we would love to take you through them. And these guidelines are there to guide countries. They are general for Africa, and they are there for each country to take them on board, localize them. Some of you might ask yourselves, what is Codex? Codex is a global entity under the UN system, which was formed way back into 1960, 62, 60, I think it's 1962, by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN and the World Health Organization of the UN. They formed together to safeguard consumers, to facilitate food trade by coming up with standards that can be used nationally and internationally to facilitate the food businesses to provide safe food to consumers. So that said, I would like to do a little curtain riser by saying that street vended foods are very key in this as the world continuously develops. There is a lot of urbanization taking place where we are experiencing rural urban migration, where people come in for issues to do with socioeconomic aspects. People leave their respective places and they move to other areas. And as they move, they access one cardinal element, and that cardinal element is food. As they are traveling, as they are looking for jobs, they do eat. And what do they look jobs for? Is to get resources for their well-being, and one of that well-being they are working for is food. And you'll find that big budgets or big percentages of people's income as percentages are spent on food. So that said, today we thought during the World Food Safety Month, where science is in action, we explore the aspects to do with street food vending. Some of these, or I will not say some of these, all of these that we are going to share as guidelines, as protocols, as standards, as anything, they are science driven. Now, why do we say they are science driven? Whether it is indigenous, whether it is modern, it remains science. I'll look at how some of the aspects. Washing hands. washing or preparing food in clean utensils. All that requires, it is a kind of a science where you need to do everything from using clean utensils as we're preparing food, our hands, our bodies, the area, the spaces we prepare food from need to be clean. So having said that, we'll need to appreciate that consumers have a right to safe food and the responsibility of also keeping it safe. You as consumers, me as a consumer, Bernard as a consumer, Dennis as a consumer, our producer, has a right to safe food and also the responsibility of keeping it safe. And how do we keep it safe and how is it our responsibility? As we go along the streets, as we travel, as we do anything, we can buy a quick snack off the street. We can buy a full meal off the street. We can, in whatever form it is prepared, it must be safe for us. And in case it isn't safe, we have to speak up and out when the food spaces, when the infrastructure, from which food is prepared, the facility, the personnel are not hygienic. We need to call to action to remedy the unsafe situations in which food is. And that's why today we want to bring out those guidelines that food that we access from informal and formal places that are classified as street vended foods or food courts, we need to speak out. This form of street vended foods is a norm that is being practiced in Uganda, a big percentage, whether we are formally employed or informally employed, whether we are rich, poor, and so vulnerable, in one way or another, we access this food. We have got the famous Rolex, which is accessed by many. Then when it has no eggs, it is a chapati, which is becoming a kind of a staple food. But even those, when we go to makeshift markets, we go to makeshift roadside streets when we're traveling, the roadside eating places, and where people are vending, and we stop at on the roadside. They're famous for selling us chicken, meat, roasted chicken, roasted cassava, roasted sweet potatoes. You know, we get a lot of sambusas, mandazi, as our children are walking to school in the morning, very early, in all of the cities, the municipalities, the towns. We see vendors selling them this kind of donut-shaped snacks, roasted peanuts. All these need to be safe, and it is part of our day-to-day behavior because of changing norms. So street vended foods or vended foods are parts and parcel of our daily activity. So they need to be safe, hygienic, and build value or create value in our bodies. Why are they? Because they're accessible, they are available, they are affordable. So the aspect of being affordable shouldn't make them safe. So food, the way they are prepared is something very key. The approaches, the methods, how it is handled, how it is stored, how it is dispensed. Many of us are given this food using the newsprint. But just imagine the oily food stuff snack you've bought and it's put in the newsprint, then the newsprint melts or migrates onto the food. Some of the ink of the newsprint has got some contaminants with it. How is the packaging handled? All these are issues that we need to look at. We have experienced, and some of you have seen the videos and complaints where meat or the different types of meat are accessed, how they are prepared, put on stocks, roasted, and they are sold to us. All these are quite challenging, and all these aspects bring in safety challenges. So therefore, it is very important that we have got hygienic controls, and all these are done at local governments, because the local governments are they're the ones that allow where all these vending places, the food centers, to be in our society. So the authority of safe street vended foods or vended foods most of the times relies on the local government. And the local governments have to follow parameters that through which they accept food vending in the local communities, in the cities, in the municipalities, towns, trading centers, our communities, both city governments or local governments have got that authority. And they should know that everyone, including even the farmers, including food processors, food handlers, and consumers, we have that responsibility to alert the local governments when things are not good, when the situation is not safe for food vending, and when the food is not suitable for consumption. So these different regulations, they are not there to impede. The regulations, the guidelines that we are talking are not there to impede, to stop food vending. They are there to facilitate safe food vending so that consumers are not endangered when they get their hard-earned money to go in and access those foods. So good hygiene in places where the local
I think Mr. Chimera, I think he went off, and I think it was really giving us a background of how the local governments are really critical when it comes to assuring that the food that is being given to our people is actually healthy, is nutritious, is safe for them. So I think that how do we then work with the local governments to ensure that the food that we are providing to our people is actually safe, is nutritious, but also is handled in such a manner that doesn't affect the health of our people. So the role of local governments and the leaders in the local governments, let it be the political wing or the technical wing, it's very, very critical for us to think about, because bottom the line, they determine where each one of us is supposed to be putting their stall. And so they are the ones licensing those guys who are preparing on the streets. They're the ones when allocating the space where people have to be preparing their food. So with all that in mind, then they become very critical to supporting us in ensuring that the safety of the people and the food we are preparing is actually top notch. But also, it comes back to the leaders there. They have inspectors who are supposed to be inspecting our restaurants, our street vending sites, etc., to make sure that there's compliance to the regulations, the standards. So the role and mandate of the local government becomes a critical pathway for us to leverage on every time you're talking about the aspects of food safety, especially in regards to handling food on the streets. So, as probably Chimera comes back, I know that he might have had a technical glitch. I just want to quickly now pick up from him and say, okay, guys, we have a lot of laws, regulations, policies, guidelines in place that are actually supposed to be handling the aspects of safety of the food that we consume. Now, in a special way, I want to share with us the different guidelines when it comes to street food vending. Now, when you look at street food vendors, first and foremost, they use quite a number of things on the street down there. Remember that they are preparing human food, and what that means, they have a lot of utensils they are using. Probably they are using plates to serve food. They are using cutlery. They are using, stoves. They are using some towels, cleaning towels. They are using saucepans. They are using flampens. A lot of equipment that they are using. But the question is, are those appliances or are those equipment actually food grade materials? But also, are they cleanable? Can you be able to clean them? Are they worth handling human food? Are they made in such a way that they can actually promote the safety of the food in which they are being placed? So the issue of appliances comes in handy. But also, when you look at the street food vendors, of course, they will need water. Now, is the water they are using, first of all, potable water? Is it clean water? And where are they getting it? So, if we don't have clean sources of water, it means that all the food that you're going to prepare on the street, people will look for water from any ways. They can get water maybe from sewage lines or wherever it is, and they use it. So it's still the role of leadership to make sure that people have access to clean running water, clean potable water, so that they can be able to actually cook food but using safer water. But of course, you also know that they have other equipment like the crockeries. That's why we're talking about glasses, we're talking about plates, we're talking about cups, we're talking about spoons, forks, ladles, chopping boards, etc. All of those are supportive whenever you're preparing food. So still the question remains the same. How safe, how clean are those materials that you're actually using? To what extent can they be cleaned? To what extent can they be used for preparing human food? And of course, we know that also the colleagues on the streets are basically generating a lot of waste. For instance, if someone is making chapati or the common Rolex of Uganda, it means that the eggs are being broken. But why are you throwing the shells of the eggs? You know that maybe they have polythene bags, they have a lot of packaging materials. Where are they discarding the waste? When it comes to these things. So they must have, of course, like disposable articles where they actually, it could be a container or something where they are throwing their waste. So they are part of the generators of waste actually when it comes to our cities, our trading centers, etc. But the question now again remains, how are they managing this waste? How are they keeping the waste? How are they ensuring that actually the waste is not problematic to the consumers who are coming to buy the food, but also how do they make sure that that waste they have generated is actually not causing harm to the people who are actually consuming the food that they're preparing, but also to themselves. But also, how do they ensure that, for instance, the waste that they have generated is not actually contaminating the food that actually they have prepared? So quite a lot of interesting things that then we need to we look up, and then also we need to think about. But also we have mobile vendors. Now, like mobile vendors are those who are not specifically in one place. They will prepare their snacks and then they keep vending them. They keep moving from one point to another, and those ones are mobile vendors. Now, the question is, how do the mobile vendors actually handle issues of food safety, because they are moving from one location to another, and preferably they are moving from the place where they prepared the food to another location to look out actually for customers. So how are they transporting that food from one location to another becomes an area of interest. So for instance, the question now would be, how do they move food from one spot A to spot B, and how do they leave spot B, they go to spot C? What equipment are they using to carry this food? And when they carry that food in that kind of equipment, How do they sell it? I mean, how do they pick the food and give it to the client? All those are areas of interest when it comes to the safety issues. You could have prepared food in a safe manner wherever you are preparing the food. But the question remains now, when you are moving up and down, you find a lady carrying, a tray, and the tray has maybe bread, or maybe it has chapati, mandazi, whatever it is. But they are not covered. So every time they're moving, the dust, the whatever, the fumes. So the question is, how are they moving this food actually from one location to another? And what equipment are they using to do that? So all of those then become critical issues to think about whenever you're talking about street food vending. What about some of those now who are carrying perishable food? There are those who are carrying yellow bananas. There are those carrying, vending some vegetables and some fruits, and there are those carrying milk. So all of these now, the perishables. How are they handling the perishables? How are they vending milk, for instance? How are they vending milk products? How are they vending eggs? How are they vending meat and poultry and fish and etc.? So it's a whole thing that previously people are neglecting. But when you look at the food vending kind of sector, irrespective of the fact that it seems to be informal, but that's where many people are picking food. But do we ever think about all these perspectives? Of course, we also have vendors who are really carrying ready to eat food, like the food is ready, it's already cooked. Someone is having pilau. Pilau is rice with meat. In Nigeria and in Ghana, we used to call it jollof. So it's like it's ready to eat, but how are we moving this saucepan from one place to another and serving customers? I mean, something of the sort. But you realize that all those things, there must be an authority, there must be leadership rendered to these guys so that whatever they're providing to communities is actually safe. So the question is now, do we have a relevant authority? Maybe let's say, do we have a ministry responsible for that? Or do we have at local level, do we have inspectors who are responsible for this? So all of those are things that we need, or that we think of talking about when we're talking about street food vending, which is critical. And many times it goes unnoticed, but it's very, very critical for us to think about the street food vending. Now, do we have public places, for instance, that have been designated for street food vending? Becomes another question. So because we must be having vendors organized, but we have those centers that have been allocated to the vendors by the leadership. So if they're not there, how do we expect the vendors to work? So all of those perspectives are supposed to be thought about every time we are discussing the aspect of street food vending. So because of those issues that I've just mentioned above, then it brings us now to say, okay, we have known appliances and all those challenges I've talked about, and all. So, what is the guidance that we can give to these guys to be able really to handle food in such a manner that delivers quality and safe food? So, for all those reasons, therefore, the Codex Alimentarius African, they came up with guidelines on street food vending. We also have guidelines for people who are doing outside catering. We also have those ones. Maybe that is for another day. But today, let me share with you a little bit on the guidelines that are supposed to be followed every time you start up a stall and it's a food vending kind of business. Now, the first thing that the regulation or the guideline talks about is the issue of regulations. Now, regulations have been set to enable, of course, different officials who are responsible to be able to inspect the food and all this. So we have already guidelines and regulations in regards to that. But one of the issues of the regulation is about licensing of vendors. In fact, the guidelines tell us that no vendor shall conduct his or her business of either preparing food or packaging it or storing it or displaying it anywhere on the street, and then also starting to sell the street food unless they have been licensed under the relevant body. It could be at the district level. Has the officer in charge actually given you a license? So there is particularly, according to the guideline, no street food vendor is supposed to vend food or is supposed to start up a vending business unless they have been licensed. So who is licensing? The local governments are supposed to be licensing. everybody who has a vending stall. And of course, licensing would mean that you actually agree to comply with these regulations. So if you do not comply, then they cannot give you a license. So each one of us is supposed to be licensed to begin a street food vending business. Now the question here is, how many of our street food vendors are actually licensed? Besides, how many of them are even aware that they're supposed to be licensed? And if they are not aware, who is then supposed to alert them about the licenses? So the vendors are supposed to receive this kind of information on licensing. Who is licensing them? How much are they supposed to be licensed? For how long is the license valid? All of those conditions must be provided to the street food vending colleagues before even they start thinking about putting up the vending stall. So if they are not aware, then we cannot hold them accountable. But it's very critical that the inspectors, health inspectors in the local governments, inform the population or inform people about the need to license if at all they have to open up a store. If we don't do that, then we shall be doing things in our own way. But that's what the guideline actually recommends. Now, there are different conditions for licensing. So licensing is not just automated. There are conditions under which a person is supposed to be licensed. So, for instance, the no relevant authority should or shall issue a renewal, shall issue or renew the license of any vendor who, for instance, does not commit themselves to comply with the regulations. So, meaning that for you even to receive a license, it is not automatic that when you go to the district or local council, wherever you are getting it, and then they'll give it to you. No. The guidelines actually prohibit the licensing of people who are not committed to actually comply with the requirements, or those who are not even ready or they are not committing to comply with the code of practice that has been established, especially at the different local governments. So it means that for you to get a license, you must commit yourself to following the guidelines. Without that, then no relevant authority is actually accepted to give you or allowed to give you this license. The second condition for licensing is that for you to be licensed, you must have undergone a basic training in food hygiene. So the inspectors are supposed to routinely be doing basic trainings on food hygiene, targeting these street food vendors. So the issue is that if you have vendors in your district or local government and you've not given them a basic training on food hygiene, then you cannot license them, because everybody who is licensed, they must have undergone a training on basic food hygiene. It's mandatory that each of the street food vendors is supposed to have that, because it is a core. It helps you to understand exactly what are we supposed to have as basic on food hygiene: washing hands, whatever, how to keep the food, how to store the food, how to keep it at temperatures that are allowed, how to prevent microorganisms from entering the food, etc. So everybody who is on the street selling us food is actually supposed to be licensed, but the condition of licensing is that they must have undergone a training, which is a basic training on food and hygiene code. So we have that code. So now the inspectors, if you go to Kampala, for instance, KCCA is supposed to be having a list of street food vendors that have met these two provisions of licensing. First of all, they are licensed. And for them to be licensed, they must have gone under a basic training on food hygiene. So anyone who has not done that, they actually, by cutters of these guidelines, they're not supposed to be on the street giving us the food. So the question is, are they actually licensed? If they're not licensed, why are they there? If they are not licensed, what has the KCCA done to make sure that they are licensed? Have they been trained? If they have not been trained, what is the problem? Because this mandate of the relevant authority, before they issue a license or even before they renew your license to be a street food vendor, they must have given you a basic training. So basically, those are the two conditions that have been set aside for licensing of street food vendors. Now, once you have been licensed, there's what we call a display of notice, that every licensed vendor shall at all times display their license and other notices that are required, probably by the relevant authority, Why do we do this? That, okay, when they've given you a license, then you are supposed to have your license, whether it is a photocopy or whatever, but you must have it displayed on your stall so that when officers come from the district or from the local authority, they don't stress you. They just look at the license and they confirm that you've been licensed. This also applies to shops, either drug shops, is it pharmacies, whatever. Everyone who's licensed, that license is supposed to be displayed. So for two reasons. One of them is that when the leaders come to inspect, they should be able to tell that you've actually been licensed and your license is within the period that uh, you are licensed. Secondly, it gives confidence to consumers to know that actually you've been licensed, and so the consumer confidence is enhanced that they can actually buy products from you. So that is what we are calling the display of notices. Every licensed vendor must, and in law now they are using even the word shall at all times, whether it is day, whether it is morning, whether it is night, you must have your license and it must be displayed on your stall so that everybody is able to know that you're actually licensed. And that is how it is. And those are the guidelines that we have. Now, we're also aware that whenever you're dealing with food, you expect that you'll have some bit of pests. Pests could be, rats, you have insects, you have, you've seen cockroaches on people's stalls. You can have rats running up and down, left, right, center. So there is also a guideline to manage that. So the guideline says that, well, when you have pests and maybe animals, you've seen people cooking food on the streets and there are cats, there are dogs, there are birds, there are insects flying everywhere. So the guideline says that, for instance, every vendor shall at all times take appropriate measures to keep his or her stall free from animals and free from pests, including, by the way, the rodents, those are the rats, including the flies, including all other vermin, to prevent contamination of the food. Because these animals, the pests, the rodents, the flies, the insects, the vermin, they can only affect the food. So the issue is that every time you have been licensed, then you must make sure that at all times, that is the word in the guideline, at all times, you must ensure that you take appropriate measures to keep your stall free from any of those. But also, every vendor then shall, on becoming aware of the presence of such pests, once you have understood that you have a pest, you should immediately take all it takes, all the measures to get rid of that pest. So, for instance, what is bringing the pest? If it is garbage, then you have to remove the garbage. If some of you heap the garbage and then it starts attracting rats and flies and insects and whatever. So, the guideline is very clear that every time you see that there is pests, or maybe they are rodents or whatever, you have to take immediate steps to make sure that you eliminate those things. But also, the same guideline tells us that any food that has been found contaminated by pests, if for instance you find that a rat has entered the food, let's say you're cooking beans and then you realize that a rat has actually dropped into the beans, you are supposed to immediately and appropriately dispose of that food. That is what the law says, and that is what the guidelines are talking about. So any food that you observe and has been contaminated by pests, maybe the insects have entered there, the rats have entered there, the cockroaches or whatever, you should appropriately discard it or dispose it off in, of course, a hygienic manner. That is what the guideline tells us. But how many of us actually dispose? You find a rat and then people proceed, they just remove the rat and proceed to serve. Meaning that if that rat had contaminated the entire soup of beans, then everybody who's going to undertake that, who's going to feast on that, is going to have contaminated food. And also the contamination of food, of course, with pests could also have some bit of poisons that come along with those pests. So that's why we are requested, one, to prevent the entry of pests and diseases, rather animals, in our area of preparation of food. And once we observe them, we're supposed to discard off and we make sure that we get rid of anything that is actually contaminating the food. So that is what the guideline actually says about pests, how we need to manage the pests on the street while we are doing street food vending. Of course, we know that the street food vendors, they continually need to be supported. They need a lot of advisory services, people to guide them, people to train them, people to capacity build them, people to give them, coachings and trainings and mentorships. Those ones are needed. And of course, the guidelines also provides for street food and advisory services. So for us to be able to enforce this code and also to be able to successfully adhere to the guidelines, the relevant authorities, of course, should provide advisories. So, for instance, in the local governments, if the health inspector is responsible, then they should continually come and give mentorship, come and give coachings, come and give trainings to those guys because that is provided for in the guidelines. So, meaning that if the inspector takes a year or two or three without coming to the people who are selling food, then they're not doing their part. And so that can be a very huge risk that actually the communities will start having street foods that are not safe because they don't have advisory services in place. So it is therefore important that we keep on training the vendors. So for you as an inspector to be able to work with the vendors, you're supposed to offer them on-site advice, on-site guidance, on-site mentorship, on-site coaching, basically to improve their operations in accordance with this code. Now, the question also remains whether the inspectors are doing this work, but also whether they know about this code. And so we need to disseminate this as much as possible so that people are aware of what is happening. But also, for us to be able to participate in designing and delivery of these formal trainings, it means that also the authorities must issue renewal licenses upon trainings. Once they have trained people, then you can issue or you renew licenses of people. But if you don't do the training, then you cannot renew because the law is clear. You can only renew once you've attended the basic training. So if you're not giving these advisories, then people cannot have licenses. So those are some of the things. But also we are supposed to work closely with the enforcement personnel. Every district has an enforcement officer. So the inspectors cannot work in isolation. They have to work closely with the enforcement personnel because the enforcement personnel, ideally, they're supposed to make sure that whatever is by law or by policy or by ordinance or whatever it is actually working. So if you are the inspector, and you're going to inspect, you cannot keep inspecting without the enforcement. So what the enforcement will do is that once you get the person who has a license, they've been trained, but they are not complying to the standard or to the code, then the enforcement officer is supposed to enforce what is supposed to be done. Carry them to police, arrest them, or cancel the license. I mean, that is what they're supposed to be doing. And that's how it is supposed to be when it comes to how the guideline has been established. So it's really hard work, but yeah, that's what we need to do. So you need to train people and you need to inspect them. You need to do joint inspections. You need to monitor the progress. How are people progressing from the previous training up to now? That is core mandate of the authority that is responsible at the district or local government level. So also the advisories are supposed to inform consumers of what is happening. They're supposed to provide information to consumers about the safety of the products on the street. So basically, that is what happens with advisories. Of course, the advisories should really be done in such a manner that is respectful, so that the vendors can keep trusting your work, but also they keep working with you. But also the consumers and the enforcement personnel, everyone has to work in harmony to make sure that we deliver safe and nutritious, healthy food to our people. Now, the code also provides for consumer education. The code is too comprehensive that it also entails what is supposed to be done for consumers. So for instance, when you're working on the street and you're providing food on the street, people are supposed to consume that food. So now the question is that do consumers even know what to consume? Do they even know how to select the food to consume? It becomes another question. So that's why the guideline talks about consumer education and gives mandate actually to the authority, that relevant authority that has been given power or mandate. It should be able to inform consumers through either posters around the market or around the vending place. So it could either be through the media engagements, radio talk shows, television shows, print media, basically to inform consumers on safety issues on streets, on the street foods. And of course, they're supposed to be doing public campaigns about the hazards, the biological hazards, chemical hazards, physical hazards, allergens, which we talked about a little bit earlier. It is the role of that authority to be able to do consumer education through all the avenues present. It could be public publicity in the communities. It could be posters. It could be infographics. It could be TV shows. It could be radio talk shows. It could any of those, as long as we are passing out the message to consumers on food safety and also the proceedings in the market space. Then consumers, of course, should also be informed of their responsibility. It's not really about teaching them what to about safety, but they need to understand also their responsibility. They have to read labels, for instance. They have to go to a place where they see hygiene. So, what is their responsibility as consumers, so that we don't blame the vendors, even when the consumers are not doing their responsibility? So, we need the code provides that the consumer should also be taught, should be sensitized about their rights, but also their responsibilities, so that you don't just be there playing politics. We need to understand what is our role as consumers, what is our responsibility, how do we do it. So all of those are supposed to be given to consumers. So it's a whole kind of section in the code or in the guidelines about the consumer education. So we need to really provide information to our consumers so that they are well aware. So that is basically that. But let us also appreciate the issue of health. So what should be the health status of vendors in this case? The code and the guideline very clear on every actor. So, for instance, the code provides that before you even start a food business, you are supposed to be checked. You are supposed to be examined. There must be a healthy examination. One, they are looking at whether you have jaundice, you have diarrhea, whether you're vomiting, whether you have some fevers, whether you have sore throat, whether you have fever, whether you have kind of discharges from the ears. Discharge could mean that your ear is oozing out some maybe pus or something. And of course, they're looking at your eyes, your nose, whether there are any discharges that are coming from that, but also visible signs of disease, skin, the wounds, etc. Why are they doing that? If you have a wound on your body, you're not supposed to cook food, because at the end of the day, you may touch food and then blood or pus goes into human food. So when the inspector is actually, when they're doing a health check, they check all those things so that you are fit for handling human food. That is what is supposed to be happening. And so there should be a medical kind of treatment if you are found sick. So this is what our authorities are supposed to be doing. So now the question would be, if I go to Kampala and I sample 500 vendors, how many of them have been examined medically? How many of them are actually checked for those illnesses? How many of them have been, so that is how it is supposed to be. And that's what the guideline talks about, to avoid the risk of making consumers sick. Now, any vendors or helpers or someone helping a food vendor who has been identified to be having a disease, they shall not be involved in cookery. They shouldn't be involved in food handling activities until they cure, until they are satisfied by a medical officer that actually they have cured and they are no longer carrying that disease. So that is what the guideline is. So once you're a vendor or you're a helper of the vendor and you've been found sick, you are not supposed to touch that food. You can only be allowed again to start touching this food and preparing on the street and blah blah when the health officer or a medical officer has confirmed that actually you are no longer sick and so you are able to handle food. That is how it is supposed to be. But also, if you're a vendor or maybe you're a helper of a vendor, you are supposed to be immunized against foodborne or waterborne diseases, maybe such as hepatitis. So each one of you is ideally supposed to be having a hepatitis A vaccine or something like that. So if at all in a country there's vaccination of waterborne diseases, like maybe typhoid or hepatitis, you're supposed to be vaccinated against them for you to be able to be given license. So that's what the code actually provides for in terms of health of the vendors. Now let us quickly also look at the guideline on hygiene. What happens? What is recommended for hygiene, personal hygiene, and behavior actually? Now, if you are a vendor or you're a helper of a vendor, during the course of your business, there are certain things that you have to observe. I think this section I'll focus on it a little bit concretely. We shall proceed with this session probably next week. But we need to know issues of hygiene and issues of behavior. Now, when you're at the store, it is mandatory, or it is a must that you must wear something that identifies you as a vendor. It could be an identification tag if issued by the relevant authority. So once you have a license, they're supposed to give you an identification tag, which you must keep wearing. Now, in our setting, some people put on aprons that have been labeled by the authority that you're a vendor, and then they can put a number 003 or something. So you must wear something that identifies you as a registered or licensed vendor. Now, you must also wear or dress in a clean and proper attire. Clean. When someone looks at you, your apron is clean. Your clothing are clean. I mean, you must dress in a clean and a proper attire. We have seen people on the street selling food, but the shirt is torn, the trouser is torn, and then the dress was last washed 2 years ago. Everything is really in a mess. So the consumers will go away because we shall train them that when you see a dirty person who is vending food, disappear, run away from them. Now, the other issue is about washing hands. You realize that people at the streets there, if you ask them, where is your water point? They may not be having it. So how do they wash their hands? Because continually you'll be touching meat, you come and touch flour, you go and touch vegetables, so at the end of the day you can have cross contamination. So it's mandatory that we keep on regularly washing our hands with soap and clean running water, one before and after handling food, and also after visiting a toilet. We've seen people who are vending food, especially those ones I talked about, the mobile vendors. The guy is carrying a basket with ground nuts, and then he's moving from location A to B, and then he's carrying them on his head, and then he feels nature call comes in. He wants to go to the toilet, and then he just walks to the toilet with a tray of eggs, with a tray of ground nuts, and the guy just enters the toilet just like that. And then when he comes back, he gets back his vinegar and keeps moving around. So such things really is a problem. We need to do a lot of awareness. When I go to the latrine or toilet, I have to wash my hands after. I have to leave this food maybe in a safer place somewhere. But many of them actually walk to the toilets with this vinegar, they walk to the toilets with ground nuts, they walk to the toilets with vegetables, they walk to the toilets with, hygiene. I mean, how do we make sure that we are hygienically sound to be able to handle the food? And of course, if you handled an animal, you need to wash your hands after handling animals, after touching raw food, after handling a toxic or dangerous material. You really need supposed to wash your hands with clean running water. What about the fingernails? Oh my God, you find these guys with very long nails that were last chopped off 2 years ago, that were last chopped off or cleaned after a year or so. The code is clear that your fingernails should be cut short and they must be clean at all times because they can carry a lot of microorganisms or a lot of dirt, and then you end up contaminating the food that was initially prepared in a safe manner, but because of your nails and your dirty hands, and you end up contaminating the food. What about the hair? It is mandatory that if you're a lady or a man and you have hair, whatever it is, your head must be covered with a headgear or a cape, or something must be covering your hair to avoid hair falling off from your head and going into the food. So that is it about the head. It must be covered. So every time you're going to see these vendors, their heads must be actually covered to make sure that you prevent a hair from falling off the head and going into the food. Just imagine many times you buy food and then you find a piece of hair, a very long strain of hair. You start imagining whether it came from the beard, from the head, or from elsewhere. I mean, it can be a little bit complex. So it's mandatory that they're supposed to cover their heads. And then when it comes to cuts, there are people who will have a wound on their hands. These guys are not supposed to handle food. As soon as you observe that there is a wound around anywhere on your hands or something that can touch food, please no touching food, because that can be a mess. So non-infected cuts can always be, closed or covered, but people with really cuts should be advisable not to really touch food. Now, when it comes to behavior, nobody is supposed to smoke when they are touching human food. No smoking. Even chewing, these things of chewing ball gum, chewing mairunji, whatever, is not allowed at the time of cookery, because your saliva will keep pushing out of your mouth into people's food. If you're smoking, that smoke can go in people's food and cause trouble. Passive smoking comes in handy. So anything like smoking, not allowed when you're touching food on the streets. Chewing your ball gum, chewing your mairunji, chewing your whatever you're chewing, not acceptable by the guidelines. So you're not supposed to be chewing at the time when you're actually preparing people's food or while you're serving food. Then also it comes to also this business of touching your nose and then you are removing the mucus, and you're touching inside your ears, you're removing that wax. All those things are not acceptable. This business of spitting all over, you are preparing food and you're spitting, you know, all those things are not acceptable when it comes to handling the food. And then, of course, we need to sneeze or cough away from the food. Sneezing is part of the game, but when you want to sneeze, you shall not sneeze or you shall not cough into the food. There are some people who have weird manners. They just cough anywhere. And, the guy is preparing food, touching food, and then he's touching the nose, the eyes, he's touching the ears, he's touching everywhere. I mean, it's very unacceptable doing that. And of course, now the issues to do with the gloves. On the streets, we do not recommend the use of gloves because people use gloves and then sometimes the gloves get off or pluck off when you're cutting something and then it goes into the food. So the use of gloves is really not recommended on the streets. But also, no vendor is allowed to use, for instance, the stall as a sleeping or dwelling place. So where the stall is, you find people sleeping under the stall, you find children sleeping under the stall, and yet that's not really acceptable. So you're not supposed to sleep where you're actually selling food from. And maybe lastly, for today, I may need to look at these two aspects of training of vendors. I've already mentioned that they're supposed to be trained before licensing, and then they're supposed to be given then later on their licenses, and then we need to put some bit of simple posters for them. Don't do this, do this. So the do's and the don'ts are also supposed to be well elaborated on the vendors' stalls or closer to the vendors. This can be done by the authorities. And then we know that for vendors associations, they have to be formed. Actually, vendors have to form a street food vendors association or a cooperative. This could encourage them on sustainability reasons, but also for self-checking or for self-governance. We recommend that the vendors are supposed to be organized in vendors kind of associations, so that when you have an association of vendors, it can be a tool for actually doing advocacy for the vendors and something to do with organizing them, etc. When you come to the location, how should it be positioned? Where are you supposed to have your stall? First and foremost, the location of a street food vending stall should be suitably situated to avoid contamination of the food. And of course, this stall is supposed to be located or situated in a designated place, meaning that the relevant authorities are supposed to avail these locations. And so, of course, it doesn't apply to mobile vending because people keep moving up and down. But the areas where the stores are located should be really clean places, not on garbage pits, not on top of waste bins, not on top of drainage systems. But where you're placing this stall should be a cleanable place, continually cleanable. And of course, the space in and around the vending stall really should be free of unnecessary stored goods. You find someone having a stall and then you find sacks of charcoal, you find all the clothings, you find all the shoes there, you find a mess of things. The code does not allow that. I mean, the regulation is very clear. The space for cooking food is for food, no other things. So there should be convenience of access, that you have a stall in a place where people, whether disabled or not, can easily actually access. Those issues. In terms of structures, I see that our time is fast spent. I think that we might need to have a conversation again around the design and the structure of the stalls. But I think small pieces, we shall be there. So maybe for now, Mr. Chimera, I have shared quite a lot of things. For starters, we've looked at the administration there, we've looked at the hygiene issues, we've looked at how to establish a stall and where to put it, and some bit of behavior when it comes to handling the stall. Now, because our time is a little bit fast spent, I think that we shall build on this next week until we finish this code, until we finish the guidelines, so that our people have material to actually refer to and everybody understands that these guidelines exist. Otherwise, people may be there and they don't know that actually the guidelines actually exist. So next week, we shall be able to start from that. And over to you, Henry. Sorry, the network paused you off, but you can now build a little bit and give us closing remarks. I know we are at the top of the hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. That is quite great and rich. And I trust all our viewers and even part of our producers and hosts, they have got something to learn, because I, for one, I also access vended foods, but I'm very critical at times. There are times when things can go wrong, but like Bernard always tells me, you cannot avoid a risk, but you can minimize it. And like it is always said, when we are in meetings, setting standards, looking at how best we can enhance consumer protection, there isn't anything called zero risk. So if there isn't anything called zero risk, we need to be proactive. We need to be anticipatory, so that we, in case of anything going wrong, we are in position to address it. So, like Bernard has shared with you, we are going to continuously unpack the street vended foods guidelines until we go to the end. We'll be taking you through pictorial aspects so that you can relate them. As I've said, in Uganda, through the support of the Codex Trust Fund and through the East African Codex Committee, Uganda has been in position to simplify the street vended food guidelines, also coming up with food court aspects. So we'll go on unpacking this. This has been something very good, and it is all about not failing the informal business and formal businesses. They are there to guide so that the consumers, the businesses, are safe and grow. We appreciate we, the consumers, we are getting urbanized. We are many in the urban areas. So these guidelines, which local governments, city authorities can make use and turn into bylaws, use them as regulations to guide, to train both those that are in the food business and also train us, the consumers. These are there to ensure the food does not endanger us. Food does not endanger us. To facilitate trade, to operate in good hygiene, designed, constructed, appropriate premises, locations. As the cities grow, the urban cities, urban communities, and our communities, they need to be sustainable. They don't need to take us back into poverty, because as we spend on health, we get poorer. If we live unhealthy lives, we get poorer. They need to facilitate zero hunger. If food is not of good quality, we consume it, we diurate it, we go back to hunger. These need to facilitate well-being, good health. But if it is unsafe, it can't provide us. It can't bring equity. Majority of the food vendors are women, they are youth. But if they are vending unsafe food, that means they are not equal opportunities, they are not empowered. They will remain in poverty. There will be unfair treatment. There will be abuse. So providing safe food has got both back and forth ripple effects. With safe food can be a lot of innovation. We can get decent jobs. We can improve our investments. Unsafe food impacts on our environment, on land and in water. Unsafe food disturbs collaboration. So all these, once we have got vended foods that are healthy, they drive issues to do with sustainable consumption and responsible production. So ladies and gentlemen, it was a great pleasure. All that we are saying, it is for our consumer protection, better business, national development, meeting the African agenda, the Africa we want, of looking at the 2063 agenda, where we have got healthy consumers. Currently, we are 1.4 billion. We need to be healthy. Majority of us who are urbanized, we are consuming vended foods. All that we are sharing is meeting and is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Can we be part of the compact that improves and enables us to realize the Sustainable Development Goals as consumers? As businesses, we do better business, ethical business. The duty bearers, governance, the government, the executive, ministries, departments, and agencies, the private sector, consumers are the market. Can we keep them healthy? Provide them to be productive, then our economies will grow. It has been a pleasure being with you this Friday during the Food Safety Month, and we look forward to being with you next Friday on the 27th of June. We will be discussing with you different aspects, and we look forward to being with you and also to share with you more with regards to street vended foods and food court guidelines of having step food dispensed from them. I wish you a superb weekend, and it's always a great honor. Thank you very much, our producer, Dennis Bongole in Entebbe, and all your colleagues in the respective cities in Africa, and also the management of Humanist Media Africa, for always allowing us. Bernard, I will never stop thanking you. You always help us share, build the communities, empower, and always be in position to make consumers sustainable, and also to speak out to make businesses better and make our economies better. So thank you very much, colleagues, and look forward to being with you next Friday. God bless.